I'm Brittany, this is Shilian, and welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch gay things. Today, we continue reading Volume 4 of the Villain Self-Saving System. We are on page 165, I think about around in the middle. I will double check. I was in a little bit of a mad dash to get here today. So, because I usually look at the page numbers ahead of time, so I know what I'm talking about. Didn't happen this week. I believe it was in the middle. What else is going on today? It is the first live stream during Pride Month. As you may have noticed with all of the rainbow variations going on in chat at the moment. So happy Pride, everybody. And also, my birthday is next week. Yes, my birthday is during Pride. That makes up for having a birthday during the summer, I feel. Not my favorite set of months, except for Pride. So I consider that fairly lucky. We will see each other again before my birthday, however, because next week the streams will be on Tuesday and Thursday, and my birthday is on Wednesday. So the next time I see you, next Tuesday, will be the day before my birthday. Just do with that information what you will. I don't know. It just feels like something that I should be sharing with you guys. So, we are going to read for about an hour and a half today because I have currently had to go a couple of days without the machine that helps me sleep. I needed to get a new power cord for it, so I've been going without it for a couple of days. So just to be on the safe side, like I'm feeling okay now, but just to be on the safe side, we're going to go for about an hour and a half instead of trying to get it to 2 hours today. And we might have a break somewhere around there in the middle. It just all kind of depends. So, we were in the middle of learning about our beloved author and everything that he was going through, went through. We're getting some context around him. And about the middle of 165. Watch it be 164, and I'm a page off. Let me see. I think I was wrong. I think it was 164. Unless somebody can prove me wrong. It usually doesn't take me this long to find it. I usually remember by now. I definitely don't remember that part. Okay. So, that was about the place that I was going to start, Brooke. Thank you for reassuring my decision. Okay. Ah, yes, indeed. So. Oh, let me get my face out of here. There we are. This is a wonderful way to start. This was the beautiful man of his dreams. The stony murder weapon rose and lowered and rose. For the first time in his transmigrated life, Shang Qingqiu was faced with a difficult life choice. Finally, he decided. Time to get a room. He would go to an inn to get a room. No, to find somewhere to stay. At present, though, he was in a field of dead bodies. Shen Qingqiu hesitated a bit, then tipped that load of Qingjing Peak's heavy, useless nuisance right off the cart the way he'd take out the trash. He hauled Maubei-jun onto it, face down, so as to conceal the face that made him lose control every time he looked at it. I forgot about that part. Worth reliving. For the time being, he couldn't return to Sangchong Mountain. No one there would realize anything was amiss too quickly. This trip was supposed to last 7 days, and only 2 had passed. To stand steadfast by this demonic young heir and protect him while he had been weakened by a sneak attack. What a wonderful opportunity to garner some goodwill. While comforting himself with this justification, Shang Qingqiu huffed and puffed as he pushed that large flatbed cart toward the city. To rent the room, Shang Qinghua spent the secret stash he had been saving these last few years. At this point, he was only an average run-of-the-mill outer disciple, and he didn't have the authority to manage accounts or draw from the sect coffers. Renting a room already stretched the limits of his economic ability. So, as a matter of course, it was a single room. So, as a matter of course, there was only one bed. Who this bed belonged to was also a matter of course. Of course it was for himself. That is where we stopped. For a while, Shen Qingqiu sprawled out on the bed like a dead starfish. After he had finished stretching out his muscles and bones, he crawled up and hauled Mo Beijun onto it. This was necessary. Mo Beijun was already in a bad mood and quite the temper, after being injured. I suppose that makes sense. If he awoke to find himself lying on the ground or scrunched into a chair, I'm too excited about the single bed thing. If he awoke to find himself lying on the ground or scrunched into a chair, could Shen Qingqiu expect to keep his life? There was no question that Mo Beijun wouldn't stop to consider the truth of the situation before rewarding him with an icicle through the chest. That's just convenient, piercing imagery. They had just passed by a medicine stand, and Shen Qingqiu had bought a bunch of such and such ointment. Although given Demon's unusually strong vitality, he could probably just toss him in the corner and ignore him, and no matter how large a hole had been poked into him, it would gradually close. However, since Shen Qingqiu had decided to cling to those thighs, he knew he had to discard all reservations and display his sincerity. As a self-proclaimed frank and honest reprobate, great master, airplane shooting towards the sky, looked down on hypocrites who kept up the aloof poser facade, despite clearly wanting to cling to people's thighs. He boldly scooped up a large lump of ointment and shoved it into the hole above Mo Beijun's kidney until it was more or less closed, then flipped him over, arranging his hands palms together in a Sleeping Beauty pose. That's like the third bit of penetration imagery on this page. After spending some time admiring this perfect face, which he had modeled after his mind's eye ideal, he pillowed his head on his arms and fell asleep on the outer edge of the bed. The summer night was stiflingly hot. Even with the window open, not a wisp of cool breeze flowed in. After tossing and turning for half the night, Shen Qingqiu had finally managed to doze off when someone suddenly shoved him to the ground with a kick to the rear. Shen Qingqiu was nearly scared to death. Scrabbling, he fled beneath the table and turned his head in a panic. Mo Beijun sat straight up on the bed, eyes shining with blue light like an overcharged battery about to explode. Shen Qingqiu had thought up his lines long ago. He beat his chest and stomped his feet, saying with deep expression, "My king, you're finally awake." Mo Beijun was unmoved, looking at him coldly. "Do you remember who I am?" Mo Beijun didn't respond. Shen Qingqiu felt not a bit of embarrassment. Delightedly entertaining the possibility of amnesia, he barreled forward. "We met on a little road just a moment ago. I said I would follow you for the rest of my life, my king, as close as..." Mo Beijun cut him off. "Why were you hugging me just now?" "As a little padded jacket," Shen Qingqiu started. "What did you say? I did what just now?" "You were hugging me." A sudden realization, thunder from a clear sky. Sleeping in this damn heat was like being baked in a furnace, and Mo Beijun's body temperature just happened to be cold. Shen Qingqiu had subconsciously moved toward the cooler side of the bed, and the closer he got, the cooler and more comfortable he'd become. No wonder he had dreamed of a giant popsicle around which he'd happily wrapped his four limbs like an octopus as he licked and cried happy tears. You know, ever since missing the very obvious energy with Cucumber Bro, I've become acutely aware anytime they invoke that shape. Just so you know. Shang Qinghua carefully peeked at Mo Beijun's face and neck. Seeing no unusual shine of moisture upon them, he couldn't resist letting out a thankful prayer. Your body was ice cold, he said cautiously. I was afraid you weren't going to make it, so I was holding you. At this, Mo Beijun scoffed. Fool, this is my natural state. The colder my body is, the better my condition. I'm not a human, for whom cold means the onset of death. Shang Qinghua carefully measured Mo Beijun's every word and expression. Seeing him relax a bit, a smile soon spread across his face. Just when he was about to slither out from under the table like a snake crawling up the stick used to strike it, Mo Beijun suddenly recovered his ice-cold demeanor. I just can't help it. Every single image since we have started reading has involved, certain shapes. And now there's both a stick and a snake. Go on. Try moving another inch. Shang Qinghua was instantly scared stiff. He pathetically clung to the table leg, curled into a ball under the table like a hamster. What do you want? Asked Mo Beijun. I don't really want anything, Shang Qinghua said shamelessly. I just want to follow you for the rest of my life. Mo Beijun acted as if he hadn't heard. You're an Anding Peak outer disciple. Shang Qinghua kept feeling that whenever anyone stressed these three words, Anding Peak, they carried an undertone of prejudice. For fear that Mo Beijun would deem him useless and do away with him forthwith, he stuck out his head. My king, listen to me. I'm young, so I have opportunities to rise in status. Get back. Shang Qinghua hurriedly retreated to safety. Satisfied with this distance, Mo Beijun said, The assistance you lent me, was it for opportunities to rise in status? As proud and arrogant as expected, he hadn't used save, a verb that would have implied being the weaker party in the situation, but rather assist, which implied it had been merely support. Shang Qinghua chuckled, playing dumb. If he said no, the credibility rating of his response would be less than 3%, but if he said yes, Mo Beijun rather looked down upon such spineless reprobates. This was the reason Mo Beijun hadn't thought twice about killing the original flavor Shang Qinghua, because he had never planned on letting him live in the first place. How could Shang Qinghua shamelessly admit that he had done it just to be? Fortunately, Mo Beijun had already come to a conclusion, and he slapped the label of greedy for life, afraid of death, slippery bootlicker, sect sellout right into Shang Qinghua. He didn't need him to respond before letting out a cold snort, and he lay down once more. Shang Qinghua waited for a long time, not moving another step. Had he received a concession for the time being? Or had Mo Beijun fainted again? In the end, Shang Qinghua didn't dare to rashly approach and remained crouched under the table, making do for the rest of the night. After struggling with himself for half the night, as soon as he woke the next morning, Shang Qinghua officially began a busy day of being ordered left and right. By noon, Shen Qingqiu had worked hard without complaint, running up and down the stairs more than 20 times and changing the water in the bathtub 7 or 8. This water was to help Mo Beijun heal his wounds. Soaking in water was the best option for this ice-powered great lord, after all. But a perfectly good tub of warm water didn't last an hour before he turned it into icy slush. Shen Qingqiu huddled in the corner, chewing on some rations he had with him, while watching Mo Beijun undress, nursing both extreme envy toward and extreme admiration for the figure and abs he had longed for in his dreams. As he watched, he suddenly realized Mo Beijun had stopped undressing and was staring at him, an unhappy look on his face. Shen Qingqiu chewed a couple of times, hurriedly swallowing a few extra bites, just in case Mo Beijun suddenly demanded he hand over his rations. "You're very fishy," Mo Beijun said. "Not fishy," Shen Qingqiu said hurriedly. "This one is sweet." He didn't have the chance to eat more than a couple bites before a few strips of black shadow hit him full in the face. So, Shang Qinghua couldn't stand around fishily anymore, as he had to go wash his newly claimed master's clothes. Indeed, this young demonic heir had only brought one change of clothes, and now it was full of holes and blood and sweat. How could he wear them any longer? Obviously, they had to be sewn and mended and washed and dried. Low fantasy Shansho worlds doggedly adhered to these kinds of unromantic, dismal, and disgusting principles of realism. Shang Qinghua swore that if he ever had the opportunity to change back into Great Master, airplane shooting towards the sky, his next book would be high fantasy Xuanhuan, of the sort where wild plot bunnies ran rampant and science was fed to the dogs. I actually haven't heard of Xuanhuan. I've heard of Wuxia. I've heard of Shansha. But not Xuanhuan. Characters would weave clouds into garments and trim the moon into a belt, and all manual labor would be resolved with the twitch of a pinky finger. There would never again be a need for dismal existences like those of Anding Peak's disciples. Shang Qinghua considerately patched the hole in Mo Beijun's clothes that had once covered his kidney, wrung them dry, and hung them up in the room. He felt he had made a very good show of himself that day, so that night, with the confidence of the ignorant, he thickened his face and crawled toward the bed. But before he got close, history repeated itself, and he was again kicked off. He sat on the ground, tears in his eyes and voice trembling. "My king, you won't let me on the bed. What if during the night you get cold, thirsty, hungry, or want to turn over? What then?" Mo Beijun lifted an eyebrow. Easily seen to. So he ordered Shang Qinghua to find a length of cord. One end was tied to his finger, while the other was tied to Shang Qinghua's finger? In your dreams, it was tied to his neck. Nothing more. They're talking about some red string shit. It says, in your dreams. Oh, yeah. My dreams, not his. Shang Qinghua lay on the ground like a corpse. The fuck, he thought to himself. Dogs have it better than I do. The only comforting thought he could scrounge up was that at least Mo Beijun wasn't some sort of pervert. The under end of the cord could have been tied to his... It's censored, so I'm just leaving it to your imagination. That treatment would have been truly inhumane. Oh, yeah, so terrible. He wouldn't want that at all. Shang Qinghua spent only 4 days suffering such hardship, but he honestly felt the days dragging by like years. Even his nights were an unceasing nightmare. On the final day, in the middle of the night, Shang Qinghua was sound asleep as he once again dreamed. This time he dreamed he was still in the real world, crying and weeping at a computer screen. Beside him was a fiendishly large man holding a thorny cucumber, shaped like a rather hairy lower leg. He was fiercely thrashing, airplane shooting towards the sky's face, and as he thrashed, he roared, "Everything you write is unhinged trash." Okay, now this just kind of sounds like the nightmares of every single writer. It may have been different than a cucumber, but he's not latent, but he's not entirely conscious either. He's in a very weird place right now. It does not surprise me that the thing is the shape of a... Airplane shooting towards the sky dodged the cucumber like his life depended on it as he strove to explain himself. "It's been so long since I've updated. Cucumber bro, don't be like this." "Then hurry and update." With this, Pierre's cucumber tied a corded loop around his neck. Submerged in great suffering, Shang Qinghua fought to wake up only to find the cord still tightening around his neck. Following it with his gaze, he found Mo Beijun lying on the bed, mechanically pulling on the cord tied to his hand. "My king, what do you require?" Shang Qinghua asked lifelessly. Only after asking a couple more times did he discover that Mo Beijun wasn't tormenting him on purpose. He was profoundly passed out, and merely tossing and turning in extreme discomfort while unconsciously yanking on the thing in his hand to try to find relief. As the unfortunate soul around whose neck the other end of the cord was tied, Shang Qinghua's eyeballs were nearly squeezed out of his head under the force of the pulls. Mo Beijun creased his brow, restlessly flipping back and forth. Shang Qinghua quietly tiptoed to his bedside. When he saw the shallow beads of sweat seeping from Mo Beijun's smooth forehead and felt the faint heat radiating from his clothes, he understood. The wound on Mo Beijun's back looked just like a little cut. Not anything alarming, but in truth, the situation was a bit serious. Oh, we have art. It was just that he was stubbornly trying to write it out and had refused to admit it. In addition, it went without saying that the ice demons hated hot weather more than anything. It was the height of summer, and the wound was possibly becoming something similar to inflamed, or even beginning to fester. His kidney was healing so slowly. Did he need some sort of medicine to strengthen it a bit? The Mobei clan needed the cold. If they didn't have the cold temperatures, they just had to make their own. Shen Qingqiu muttered his sleeping posture is really so fucking bad, then accepted his fate and went out. Unhindered by the annoyance he earned for knocking on doors in the middle of the night, he asked for 2 leaf fans, a basin of water, and 2 clean towels. He returned and wiped Mobei down, then placed a wet towel on his forehead. Taking up 1 leaf fan in his left hand and the other in his right, he fanned like his life depended on it. He fanned and yawned incessantly, fanning until his eyes were bleary. Half dreaming and half awake, he seemed to see Mobei eyes open. Icy blue pupils were bright and cold under the moonlight, like a pair of magnificent and eerie Oh, crap. I always forget the emphasis on this word. Chrysoberyls? That feels wrong, but I'll go with that. This scene was profoundly frightening. Shen Qingqiu shuddered and opened his eyes wide to take a better look, but Mobei were clearly shut tight. Once Shen Qingqiu awakened, he realized there was a major problem. During the night, he had become dizzy from the heat. As he waved and waved those leaf fans, he had managed to topple over on the bed and fallen asleep. Too close, too close. We have art of the fanning in question. It's too funny. It is simply too funny. Thankfully, Mobei was still asleep. If he'd woken, he might well have kicked Shen Qingqiu's brains clear out of his head. Shen Qingqiu hurriedly jumped off the bed and lay down in the corner of territory he had claimed for himself on the floor by the headboard. After a while, the bed frame began to creak lightly, and Mobei finally sat up. Shen Qingqiu hissed to himself. That had been too close. If he had woken up even a little later, he'd have been turned into a blood splatter on the spot. The next day, having obtained King Mobei's gracious permission, Shen Qingqiu was finally able to see the light again, and he went out on the street for a stroll. Well, actually, he had clung to Mobei thighs and wailed, "My king, I'm out of rations. My cultivation level isn't so high that I can eat when I want and abstain when I don't, like you can. If you don't let me go out and buy my food, if you don't let me go out to buy food, I'll starve to death and my corpse will stink up your room." He bought a bowl of thin congee to drink from a shop in a street corner. The congee was clear as water. When he looked down and glimpsed his own reflection, he beheld a chrysanthemum battered by the rain. A trampled M-I-E-N. I think it's pronounced mine. It might be mean. A trampled mine. Oh, you know what? Along with the other one, I'm writing that down to look up later. Wan and sallow. Just as Shen Qingqiu was wallowing in his wretched misery, he suddenly heard someone call him Shidi from behind. He turned to see some 5 young men exuding immortal auras, their sleeves and hems fluttering in the breeze as they shouldered long swords and walked solemnly toward him. Comrades! His comrades from Sangchong Mountain sect! Right, 7 days had passed, so they had organized a group to come find him. Shen Qingqiu was moved to tears. Reaching out a trembling hand, he called, "Shishang, wei Shishang!" A reserved smile graced the face of the leading youth. 2 swords hung at his waist, one long, one short, and his sleeves billowed as if filled with a cool breeze. It was Wanjian Peak's Wei Qingwei. When he saw Shen Qingqiu rush out to greet him, he raised a hand to meet him, moved. Ah, it's the ex-Shidi thing again, so just a nameless Shidi. Ex-Shidi, what happened to you? How have you so completely transformed as to reach such a state in the few days since we last met? You don't even look human." Shen Qingqiu choked down a wave of hot tears, then awkwardly said, "That's probably because I'm not ex-Shishang." Sure, he had become a bit skinnier because he wasn't eating well, but what was with that don't even look human remark? Moreover, Shang Qinghuan had been to Wanjian Peak Sword Trials Terrace at least 3 times to polish swords for Wei Shishang and his buddies, and every time they'd wanted him to sweep their rooms while he was at it, and to make them food, and to also feed their pangolins. How could they have already forgotten his face? That doesn't really surprise me that much. Can't you see I'm making a joke? Wei Qingwei asked. What, is it not funny? Oh, right, Shang Shidi. Why are you all alone? Where are the others? Why did you delay your return? Did something happen? Wei Shishang, you really need to work on your jokes. As for the others, This attack had been too sudden, and Shang Qinghua couldn't make up a seamless alibi on such short notice, so he just swayed a couple of times, his face deathly pale, then fell to the ground with a plop. As he looked like he couldn't hold up much longer, no one would be suspicious if he pretended to faint. While he was playing dead, he felt Wing Qingwei crouch down and poke his face a couple of times. The other said, Shishang, he fainted. What should we do? What else can we do? Wei Qingwei asked, still poking. Let's drag him back first and figure it out after. At Chongding Peak, rows and rows of dead bodies were arranged outside the main hall. Other than Shang Qinghua, every Onding Peak outer disciple who had been sent to retrieve goods that day lay in repose, down to the last. Shang Qinghua knelt in front of the bodies, tears falling to the ground. There was no way around it. It was hard to get by in this cultivation world. Someone like him with mediocre innate ability really couldn't make it without well-developed tear glands. If he hadn't had those, he wouldn't be able to put on this act of a sorrow so heartbroken it stilled the tongue in front of the Peak Lords. After the Peak Lords finished questioning him, they went into the hall to discuss, the atmosphere serious and solemn. Shang Qinghua suddenly heard the tinkling of sword tassel pendants, and a youth wearing Qingjing Peak's uniform slowly approached him. This youth had snowy fair skin, slender brows and eyes, pale lips, and a somewhat harsh appearance. His black hair was neatly tied behind his head with a light green ribbon, and a sword was held in his arms. It was precisely that inauspicious star, that heartless ghoul, that certain, eccentric fellow from Qingding Peak, proud immortal demon ways, scum villain par excellence of the next generation, Shen Qingqiu. Once Shen Qingqiu finished examining the bodies, he asked carelessly, Did that demon ask you to bring back some message or perhaps some object? Shang Qinghua started, shocked that Shen Qingqiu had actually chosen to grace him with unsolicited words. No? Shen Qingqiu had a habit of raising his chin, so he was often looking down his nose at others. Every time they spoke, Shang Qinghua felt like Shen Qingqiu was sneering at him. Granted, the sneering didn't really matter, he was pretty used to it. Then that's strange, Shen Qingqiu said, his expression like a smile, yet not. All the others died. If you don't have some message to bring to us, why would you, of all people, be the only survivor? Damn, baby, that's cold. Shang Qinghua blinked his eyes, tears once again streaming down his face. This time Shen Qingqiu smiled for real. Shang Shidi, exactly how did you escape unscathed to return to Sangcheng Mountain? Shang Qinghua absolutely could not afford to give a careless response to this question. The Shen Qingqiu of this world functioned in accordance with his original settings. He wasn't like those low-IQ, paper-thin, cannon-fodder villains, and he was under no circumstances easy to deceive. If Shang Qinghua blew his cover and got reported, his clandestine second career would be over before it began. So, he played dumb and laughed awkwardly for 30 seconds. 30 seconds! That's a long time. That may not seem like a long time, but you literally, you set a clock and you try to laugh awkwardly for 30 seconds. That's a while. Suddenly, the light bulb in his head lit up and he instantly began to stammer. That is, it might be because he hadn't for a second hesitated to kneel. Because he'd yelled, "My king," with volume and sincerity. Because he'd brazenly abandoned all dignity. Shen Qingqiu waited patiently and, for his trouble, received a fit of gut-wrenching coughs from his target. Shang Qinghua coughed until tears poured from his eyes. Shen Qingqiu backed up a step, a shade of disgust on his face. Everyone has a weakness. Just you see who I'll summon to deal with you. Sure enough, after 5 seconds of this, Yue Qingyuan's voice came from behind them. Qingqiu Shidi, in the first place, the behavior of the demon race has no logic to speak of, and moreover, Shang Shidi only just managed to escape a terrible catastrophe. Even if there are questions to ask, why not wait until he recovers a bit? And he appears! The god-tier summon, do-gooder, and future sect leader, Yue Qingyuan, enters the battlefield. Shang Qinghua silently began to count. Shen Qingqiu raised his hand. Fine, since you find my words so unpleasant to hear, I won't say any more of them. Yue Shishang, as you please. 1 hit. Our Shidi from Onding Peak descended the mountain to help handle affairs for Qingjing Peak. Why must Shidi be so reluctant to grant him even a bit of sympathy? Asked Yue Qingyuan. Shang Shidi, why is your coughing growing worse? Do you need me to call Chen Xiao Peak's Chen Xiao Peak's Mushidi to take a look at you? 2 hits. Shang Qinghua shook his head at Yue Qingyuan, shedding tears of gratitude. He continued to count. Shen Qingqiu sneered. The 12 peaks all oversee their own duties, and each has their own expertise. Onding Peak is supposed to do this sort of thing in the first place. Why must Yue Shishang speak like they've been wronged in some way? As if Onding Peak is the only one with things to do in Sangchong Mountain. Besides, don't tell me Shishang believes they really do work hard without complaint. You think they don't curse us out behind our backs every day? 3 hits. Yue Qingyuan's expression was unerringly patient from beginning to end. He was just about to respond when Shen Qingqiu cut him off. Stop. Thank you for your instruction, Yue Shishang. Qingqiu will continue to listen to... my brain shorted out. Qingqiu will continue to listen in the future. I'm going. 4 hits. Combo. Shen Qinghua knew in his bones that if these two struck up a conversation, they would inevitably part on bad terms by the 5th exchange. After Shen Qingqiu walked away, carrying Shu Ya, Yue Qingyuan finally turned around. Shang Shidi, you've suffered a scare. No, Shang Qinghua said hurriedly. Compared to the exhaustion and exploitation he'd suffered these past few days, a little scare was nothing at all. But all things had a silver lining. After this incident, perhaps because the old Onding Peak Lord wanted to console Shang Qinghua or whatever, he was promoted to an official inner disciple. Shang Qinghua sang happily the whole way, returning to the large common dormitory to pack up his things before arriving at Onding Peak's highest level dormitory, the Leisure House, to report for duty. That's right. You didn't read that wrong. On Onding Peak, the disciples who ran around here and there all their lives like exploited servant girls lived in a dormitory called the Leisure House. Leisure my ass. Great Master, airplane shooting towards the sky, swore he hadn't come up with his name with any satirical intent, but nowadays every time he saw those words he was overcome by the incredible malice of this world. Shang Qinghua found his own small room. Exhausted in both body and soul, he preserved and laid out his bedding. He persevered and laid out his bedding, then turned around to pour himself a cup of water. But as soon as he turned back, there was another person lying in his bed. In an utter cliché, the new teacup he had just received from the steward's office dropped from his hands right onto his foot. His legs softened, nearly sending him falling onto his rear. My king. Although actually, as utterly cliché as that is to drop the thing you're holding, I've done that. When literally turning around, like at work and turning around and seeing like my work crush, this was a very long time ago, seeing my work crush, I worked at a grocery store and I was getting like a bunch of packs of cigarettes for some customer that I had, and I turned around and I didn't know he was there, and I saw him just like across the way, and I literally dropped all of the and had to like pick them all up. It was utterly cliche, but it does happen apparently to people like me. Mo Beijun turned to face him. He was expressionless, but his voice was cold as ice. You'll follow me for the rest of your life, Shang Qinghua was going to cry in fear. Mo Beijun had even followed him back here. He'd never thought... No, strictly speaking, it wasn't like he'd never thought about it. After all, Mo Beijun had a special ability. Mysterious phantom, come and go like shadow. Shang Qinghua had thought it up in the first place so Mo Beijun could help Binge slaughter and pillage, and so he could move under the cover of darkness anywhere and at any time. Shen Qingqiu proceeded to babble nonstop. My king, allow me to explain. That day, as soon as I went outside, I just wanted to drink some kanji and come back, but who could have known that fate was messing with me? I ran into a familiar Shang. I was afraid he'd ask too many questions, and I let something slip, and that he'd take people to look for you, my king, and pick a fight with you, which wouldn't have been good. In addition, your injuries weren't causing you serious trouble anymore, so I thought it through from different angles and decided that for my mission, I had to endure disgrace and follow them back here, from where, if I saw an opportunity, I would... The hand Mo Beijun was using to prop up his temple seemed to have gotten tired, and he switched to the other. They told you to return, and you just followed them back. What else could I have done? Shen Qinghua asked, aggrieved. Refuse to submit on pain of death? Show my hand and fight? That wouldn't do. Aside from the fact that I can't defeat them, the important thing is that I still have to be an undercover agent for you, my king. So how could I ruin my reputation with Sancheng Mountain now? In the midst of this wildfire burst of enthusiasm, he struck while the iron was hot. A report for my king. I've already become an inner disciple. Doesn't that demonstrate ample drive to succeed? Doesn't that show I have a lot of potential? Kissing up. He was kissing up as hard as he could. However, no matter how much it looked like he was kissing up on the surface, Great Master, airplane shooting towards the skies, inner heart was as placid as a spring day. He had always firmly believed. 1. There's gold when a real man kneels. Yes, in that order. That comes with a footnote. A corruption of the saying, below a man's knees there is gold, meaning that a man's subordination is as rare and valuable as gold. Shen Qinghua's alteration implies profit in subordination. 2. A real man doesn't cry for no reason, but if he doesn't cry at times like this, then when will he? Then when will he? Can I speak? I really can't. This is too fucking much. Whew. These 2 major life principles told him that in times of great need, kissing up a bit wasn't anything remarkable. If you thought about it another way, Mo Beijun was a character Shen Qinghua had created, and as the author, Mo Beijun was like his own son. For a father to concede a bit to his own son, to show a bit of love, that clearly couldn't be called anything strange. What was that saying? Children are the debts parents owe from their previous lives. That has a footnote. A reference to the superstition that if you are indebted to someone in this life or a prior one, they may be reincarnated as your child to collect on what you owe. Damn! There's a concept. Ping ping, pang pang. Shen Qinghua suffered another good beating, and thereafter hugged his knees, crouching in his chair where he adeptly fooled himself into taking this as a Pyrrhic victory. After stretching his muscles and joints, Mo Beijun lay back down on the bed, where he sprawled out and turned his back to Shen Qinghua. He spoke in a sleepy voice, neither loud nor soft. We'll continue tomorrow. Shen Qinghua was struck silent. Continue? He had an urge to scream and shout, to call down the entirety of Sancheng Mountain to accompany him to his death. Of course, the reason an urge was an urge was because it could usually be checked, and because it shouldn't actually be carried out. Not even removing his boots, Mo Beijun lay upon Shen Qinghua's brand new, not once slept on bed. Shen Qinghua's heart was as desolate as a winter wasteland. My king, this is Sancheng Mountain. A highly lethal pillow flew over and struck Shen Qinghua, making him grimace in pain. Shen Qinghua picked up the pillow. He attempted tact. My king, that is my bed. Mo Beijun stuck up a finger and waved it at him. Cool and aloof, he said one word. Mine. Understood. Because Shen Qinghua's whole person belonged to Mo Beijun, his things also belonged to Mo Beijun. Naturally, this included his bed. Did the reverse also stand? At this kind of time, that one saying applied, but with a twist. What's yours is mine, and what's mine is also mine. Shen Qinghua rolled off the chair with a huff, and silently went to pick up the broken pieces of teacup at his feet. He began to hum a little tune as he did. The lyrics to the tune, You're on the bed and I'm on the ground. I get radish husks and you eat meat by the pound, while tidying his new room. At least a single pillow had been kindly bestowed upon him. Before, he hadn't even had that. Know how to be content with your situation, and you'll always be happy. He cuddled his pillow. It was finally time to retire after a long day of service. That's a scene break. Absolutely not. Oh, we're almost to the end of part 3. Aren't there like 7 parts to this? I'm trying to see how far we have to... Oh, a while. We may not get through it today. Dang. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. We're not getting through it today. Absolutely not. This actually might be... Well, hang on. Let me finish this part 2 here real quick. And then we'll do a very quick break. To stand up, walk around, stretch. I'm going to grab some more tea. And then we will continue. So, on page 183. 3 days later, Shang Qingqiu was as hardworking as a happy little honeybee. Mabeijun had slept in the leisure house for those 3 days, then disappeared without a word. Only with this had Shang Qingqiu fully realized just how unscientifically god-tier the cheat he'd given Mabeijun was. 3 days. In 3 days, there had been no warning bell, no suspicion, no nothing. Not a single person had found out that a demon had strutted all the way up to live on Anding Peak and ordered about a future elite logistics disciple as his own beast of burden. Like a freed surf singing in joy, Shang Qingqiu floated about at full energy for a while, right up until he received his next mission from the old Anding Peak Lord. Anding Peak's missions were invariably dare-to-day... Oh, miscellany? I'm pretty sure that's how that's pronounced. Differing only in whether you battled through logistics or struggled on the front lines, but it was inevitably alarming to be in close proximity with dangerous organisms. For example, rushing in to deliver blood-replenishing talismans and pills to Baijian Peak when they were in the thick of battle with resentful spirits was a cruel and frightful type of mission, no matter how you looked at it. At least Mabeijun was a capable protector. Shang Qingqiu thought Mabeijun had already tossed him to the back of his mind, but on several later occasions when he ended up in hot water, he would be fished up in passing by some strange creature that was clearly demonic in appearance, and he was thusly able to remain intact. This really counted as, stick close to me and I'll protect you, didn't it? Shang Qingqiu couldn't help but conclude that clinging to thighs and whatever was both quite useful and quite necessary. If it weren't, he never would have survived this far. That's the end of part 2. We're on page 185 for part 3, and we will be right back with some fresh tea and for whatever it's just too funny. It's too funny, and I'm having too much fun with this whole thing. I will be right back. This is your cue to get up, stretch, walk around, and what have you. And when I get back, we will keep going. Alrighty. Getting my face out of the way once again. No, that's not how that works. No, that's not how that works either. Hang on a moment. There we are. That was weird. But anyway, I'm just glad the whole thing didn't come crashing down. Hello, I trust that you guys can actually see me now. I basically thought I had come back, but then apparently I had almost like ruined everything. So, let me get that out of the way. Get that out of the way so I can see you guys. Great. Now, part 3 of this airplane madness. Just absolute madness. Page 185. One day, Shang Qinghua's concise great system delivered a new command. Become the Anding Peak... My brain got confused as to whether or not it should do the system voice. Become the Anding Peak head disciple within 3 years. He'd already run missions into the outside world and made a good showing under Mobejun's care. But if he wanted to become head disciple, he would also have to pay more than a little attention to affairs within Sangchang Mountain itself. As everyone knew, all the cannon fodder supporting cast in the Proud Immortal Demon Way only had an IQ of 40. Therefore, the so-called palace intrigue was pretty much all at this level. So, the old Anding Peak Lord already had a head disciple. Let's call him A. A was outstanding to the max, where outstanding meant being a master of serving tea, changing water, washing clothes, and folding blankets, and that he was considered a dab hand at the housekeeping services center. Some days, the old Peak Lord requested that A make 12 delicious flat cakes and send one to each peak. All Shang Qinghua needed to do at such a time was stealthily scatter a ton of salt or sugar on every flat cake that A had meticulously made in order to render them flat out unpalatable. Repeat the above process 3 times. And okay, now the Peak Lord has finally lost all hope in his former senior disciple. Think about it, if you can't even make a good flat cake, what can you possibly do? Now, all Shang Qinghua needed to do was display his expert culinary skills a couple of times, and he could successfully ascend. This was called, if you don't have enough IQ, make up for it with stupid plot twists. If you can't do the best, then be the worst. If the plot is so imbecilic that readers roast it like crazy, that's also kind of a success. In Proud Immortal Demon Way, these types of plots were too numerous to count. The way in which readers flocked together all year round to roast them could have been said to be one of the great spectacles of the Zhangdian comments section. And the fiercest roaster of all was none other than Peerless Cucumber. As Shang Qinghua thought about this, he couldn't help but feel a bit of nostalgia for those comment section companions, and for that one dear friend in particular. He truly missed the force behind those inexhaustible howls that ran along the lines of airplane shooting towards the sky. It's exactly because you have these kinds of ideas that you're only a third-rate stallion novel writer. However, as the Anding Peak head disciple, his troubles only increased. For example, in his time as an outer disciple, he never would have had the chance to descend the mountain on a quest with Shen Qingqiu and Lu Qingge. How many fucking lives of disastrous karma must he have lived to draw this super special prize? Sangchang Mountain placed a high emphasis on maintaining kinship between peers. It was common for a handful of head disciples to group up and sally out on side quests every now and again. On this one, the division of labor between the 3 of them was clear. Lu Qingge was the thug hired to be the vanguard, while Shen Qingqiu was in the center in charge of feigning civility and deploying sneak attacks and finishing blows, as well as waving his fan and being a poser. But don't let anyone know he said that. And Shang Qinghua, naturally, he was the one in charge of driving the carriage, making inn reservations, carrying luggage, and managing both the trip's income and expenses. Logistics, you know? If only he had been let off so easily, that would have been great. They say that at night if you stick your head over the edge of the well and look into its mouth, you'll see your reflection within, looking up as it smiles faintly and beckons. Out of nowhere, it drags people in and drowns them. Sometimes you'll even hear your dead relatives. Shang Qinghua coughed. Shen Qingqiu, Lushidi, can you let me finish first? He put the scroll down. Shen Qingqiu whisked a book out from his sleeve. He could turn on his poser act anytime and anywhere, sitting or standing. At present, he was leaning on the trunk of an old banyan tree in the shade, putting his magnificent scholarly essence on full display. Meanwhile, Lu Qingge had already gone to stand by the mouth of the well and stuck his head over the edge to look inside. Lu Qingge wanted to wrap things up as fast as possible to avoid having to interact with Shen Qingqiu at any point during the trip, and Shen Qingqiu wanted to let Lu Qingge finish doing all the hard work and get lost as fast as possible. Neither one cared to burden himself with the other's presence. Each had their own considerations, and neither was listening to Shang Qinghua's careful explanation of the mission. Lu Qingge looked back up. It didn't. Shang Qinghua understood. Lu Qingge meant, my reflection didn't smile faintly and beckon to me. He spread his hands. Well, how about we have Shen Qingqiu go over and try? Shen Qingqiu stowed away his book, swapping it for a folding fan. He strolled over to the side of the well. Please step aside. Lu Qingge had already stepped aside a good dozen paces. Shen Qingqiu carelessly took a look into the well, but this also seemed to yield no results. Shang Qinghua flipped through the scroll, paper rustling. That's so strange. This clearly said... The unfortunate thing was, no matter how hard he rustled the paper, he couldn't drown out the sound of Shen Qingqiu's malicious question. We've both tried. Isn't it your turn? Sure enough, in this world, even the monsters bullied the weak and feared the strong. When the other two had looked, they hadn't seen a damn thing. But when it was Shang Qinghua's turn, he clearly saw his own reflection coquettishly wave its hand. Without another word, Lu Qingge smacked his sword's hilt. In a powerful arc, Cheng Luan flew from its sheath and rushed into the well. After a moment of silence, the tranquil surface of the water began to churn and bubble. Shang Qinghua scrupulously took one step back, then another, retreating a safe distance away, only to hear a burst of ghastly wailing before a giant wispy blob of spirits spewed out of the well and shot into the sky. Lu Qingge smashed apart the clump of women's heads that were chasing and biting at him. Get back! Usually, once the fighting started, any Anding Peak disciples not in charge of replenishing supplies were supposed to scram as far away as possible and hang back at a safe location. Unfortunately, Shang Qinghua had miscalculated and didn't scram far enough. All his means of egress were blocked by the resentful spirits, which had taken the form of a white haze. Now that things had come to this, he could only bust out his special ability. His eyes rolled back in his head and he collapsed on the spot. Playing dead was a time-tested technique. In the chaos of battle, Lu Qingge and Shen Qingqiu accidentally pressed their backs together, and their faces simultaneously contorted with looks of revulsion. Shen Qingqiu had already shot out a spiritual blast, which brushed by Lu Qingge's shoulder as it passed. Lu Qingge, angered, immediately retaliated with a blow. Great. The entirety of their combat forces were now ignoring the enemy in order to fight amongst themselves. Are you blind? Shen Qingqiu yelled. What are you hitting? Lu Qingge wasn't any more polite. Who hit first? Who went blind first? Shang Qinghua lay on the ground, eyes still rolled back. He had clearly seen when, moments ago, a faint white shadow peeked out from behind Lu Qingge. Shen Qingqiu's attack had passed Lu Qingge's shoulder to disperse it. As he watched, the blows his peers rained down on each other grew fiercer and fiercer, their eyes going red with bloodlust. Forgetting to play dead, he sat up and called weakly, You guys, don't fight, Lushidi. You misunderstood. In fact, Shen Qingqiu was just... Shen Qingqiu flung out his hand, and several deep cracks were smashed into the wall by Shang Qinghua's head. Dust and pebbles streamed down. If you're going to die, then die completely, Shen Qingqiu said icily. Don't change your mind halfway. Without another word, Shang Qinghua collapsed and went back to contentedly playing dead. At last, they sealed away the well creature and all the resentful spirits it had collected in a retrieval vessel, not missing a single one. Shen Qinghua led over the cart and horse. Without sparing them a single glance, Lu Qingge took off down a different road. Shen Qinghua said hurriedly, Lushidi, where are you going? Lu Qingge snorted. I will not journey alongside a backstabbing colleague. Shen Qingqiu clapped his hands and smiled. How wonderful. For my part, I don't care to journey alongside someone who's all brawn, no brains. Shang Shidi, let's go. He grasped Shang Qinghua's shoulder, and Shang Qinghua squeaked in agreement through teeth clenched in pain. Finally struggling free of Shen Qingqiu's evil clutches, he caught up with Lu Qingge to caution him. Lu Shidi, Shishang has a word of advice to offer. Don't cultivate by yourself all the time. It's easy to fall into a qi deviation. Lu Qingge still hadn't responded when on the other road, Shen Qingqiu used the base of his fan to rap on the rails of the cart. Shang Qinghua hurried back. The whole way home he watched Shen Qingqiu closely while driving the cart. Shen Qingqiu was leaning on the side of the carriage reading a book, but under Shang Qinghua's stare, his expression grew darker and darker. He narrowed his eyes. What are you staring at me for? Shen Shishang, I really wasn't going to say anything, Shang Qinghua said timidly, but since you've asked me so sincerely, then you're holding your book upside down. In a split second, Shen Qingqiu's face reddened. He abruptly rose and drew his sword. No, don't do anything rash. Shen Qingqiu had the thinnest face. If you tore down his pretenses right in front of him, he would remember you for a lifetime. Shang Qinghua was already regretting the quip. But if a person like Shen Qingqiu, who had perfected the art of poserhood, was holding his book upside down, he really had to be incensed. That sounded about right. He had gone to all the trouble to do a good thing, but the result hadn't met his expectations. But if that was the problem, then he should just go and explain himself to Lu Qingge, just admit he was trying to help him out. But Shen Qingqiu wouldn't do it. If you won't do it, just let me help you explain, thought Shang Qinghua. But Shen Qingqiu wouldn't compromise his own pride. Maybe he was too embarrassed. People really shouldn't twist themselves into knots. That's just self-torture. Shen Qingqiu stared at him with a vicious gaze, and cold sweat flowed down Shang Qinghua's back. After a while, Shen Qingqiu finally sat back down and sheathed his sword. With great effort, he composed himself, then said with a superficial smile, Shang Qinghua, shut up, all right? Shang Qinghua's heart itched ferociously. He raised a hand. Can I say one more thing? Shen Qingqiu rubbed his temple with his right hand, then lifted his chin to indicate permission to speak. Shang Qinghua looked at him with an earnest gaze, then spoke the most meaningful and heartfelt string of words he had spoken since an electric current had shocked him into proto-mortal demon way. If, in the future, you see someone fall into a qi deviation, don't panic, and don't rush up rashly thinking you can save them. You must stay calm and call for help. Don't try to do it yourself. If you don't, you'll definitely be more of a hindrance than anything, and you'll make a big mess, and you'll abandon yourself to despair from there on. You'll never be free of it for the rest of your life. Even jumping into the Yellow River won't wash you clean. Shen Qingqiu was mystified. If someone else fell into qi deviation, what would that have to do with me? Why would I panic? Why would I want to help? Shang Qinghua's face was the very definition of, I knew you'd say that. Either way, just make sure you remember. Couscous summed it up very nicely, and here we find out Shenju likely didn't intend to kill Lu Qingge and tried to help him, but the attempt killed him. As Shen Yuan mentioned in the beginning, that attempt to help was very risky. Beautifully put. Exactly, yes. We're on page 192. That was a scene break, by the way. Whew. What time is it? Okay. Once Shang Qinghua became the Peak Lord, he at last no longer needed to bow and scrape to anyone. A busy life was still a busy life, but at least he had been promoted from exploited servant girl to head of internal affairs. This totally counted as rapid progress and long steps. Apparently that particular person on Qingjing Peak whom no one could afford to offend had fallen ill. After he recovered, a secret meeting was held on Chongding Peak. In the side hall of Chongding Peak, 10 of the 12 Peak Lords were present and accounted for. Do you feel that Qingqiu Shidi had been very odd these past few days? Yue Qingyuan asked, completely focused on the topic. Several Peak Lords agreed. More than just odd, said Lu Qingge in a solemn tone. He's practically a whole different person, muttered Qi Qingqi. Just then, Shang Qinghua stepped into the side hall, worn and weary from travel. Over the past few years, Chen Xiao Peak's dragon bone cantaloupe seeds had been selling quite well outside the sect, and he had already spent several months rushing about on sales trips. He had been dragged into this mysterious meeting as soon as he got back, and he still didn't quite understand the situation. He rubbed his hands together. About that, I haven't seen Shen Qingqiu for a few days. Could everyone please elaborate? How exactly has he been odd? He had a calm and harmonious conversation with me for a whole 2 hours, said Yue Qingyuan. Shang Qinghua was both speechless and terrified. Ah, yeah, my God! How odd! That really is very odd. Ordinarily speaking, the bridge between these two was impassably burned. Without rebuilding the bridge, there was absolutely no chance of harmonious developments. Thus far, the T-5 sentences until they part on terrible terms rule had held true as baseline normal. A whole 2 hours worth of a calm and harmonious exchange, this was more than a fantastical level of progress. In the Lingxi caves, He helped me, said Lu Qingge. Shang Qinghua finally remembered. Right, by now Shen Qingqiu should already have helped Lu Qingge to his death, so how could Lu Qingge still be hanging about, sitting here to attend a meeting? Was it possible that the warning Shang Qinghua had given Shen Qingqiu after defeating the well creature had actually made an impact? The other Peak Lords continued to list Shen Qingqiu's every behavioral oddity over the last few days. Sustaining injury while beating back an impetuous demoness, this, stepping forward to protect his disciples and showing care and concern, that, Shang Qinghua's face began to twitch. He thought it over back and forth. But no matter how he looked at it, this kind of altruistic self-sacrificing character behavior was seriously OOC. Unable to resist, he said, Wait, he couldn't have been possessed, could he? Wei Shishang, how was your Sword Trials Terrace? Did he visit? At the Sword Trials Terrace of Wei Qingwei's Wanjian Peak, there was a mystical sword known as Hongjing, which no person had ever been able to draw. But if something like a resentful soul or evil spirit were to approach the blade, it unsheathed of its own accord. If Shen Qingqiu really had been possessed by some impure creature, as long as he approached the Sword Trials Terrace, Hongjing would emphatically sound the alarm. However, Wei Qingwei said, he went 3 times and tried to draw at every one, and there was absolutely no sign of movement. There is no demonic energy in his body, Yue Qingyuan said slowly. I could detect no signs that he has been possessed. Qi spread her hands. It doesn't make any sense for him to be possessed. Possession at least involves some sort of goal, but he hasn't been doing anything. He's even more idle than before. After the discussion session, they remained unable to reach a decision. In the end, Mu Qingfeng said, It's not necessarily a case of possession. In my opinion, perhaps Shen Qishang's old problem has reappeared. All the Peak Lords looked at each other. What this old problem was didn't need to be said aloud, everyone understood. Shen Qingqiu, as a person, was ambitious and aggressive, proud and arrogant. This wasn't the first time he tried to force instant success. Maybe he had gone off to cultivate in secret again and had ended up falling into a qi deviation. Mu Qingfeng continued his analysis. I have heard of quite a few such cases. When a person is hit on the head with a large rock, or if they perhaps suffer a violent shock, sometimes they lose a few of their memories of the past. So it's not necessarily impossible for someone to fall into a qi deviation and forget their past, thus leading to their temperament to undergo major changes. Then is it possible to recover? Yue Qingyuan asked. Qi wrinkled her nose. Jingmen Shixiang, do you actually hope he'll remember and recover his previous character and conduct? Yue Qingyuan started. Me? I cannot say. When he continued, it was earnestly. Even though the way he is now is overall very good as well, if he can remember, it will be for the better. Before, he never offered a proper greeting when he met Jingmen Shixiang or his fellow sect members, one of the other Peak Lords said in confusion. He never visited us at our homes, and when he spoke, it was all needles concealed in silk floss, full of biting sarcasm. What was good about that? The way he is now is quite an improvement. Yue Qingyuan smiled faintly, but he did not speak. The last time I went to write his prescription for Without a Cure, I examined him, Mu Qingfeng said awkwardly. There were no significant symptoms, so it would be difficult to know where to begin. I'm afraid we can only let nature take its course. Having reached the verdict, the Qingjing Peak Lord has lost his memory. Celebrate and spread the joyful news. The meeting adjourned. He shows kindness for 2 seconds, and everyone's like, something is deeply wrong. Which tracks. After this meeting concluded, Shang Qinghua felt he was very much obligated to investigate these strange happenings in passing while delivering Qingjing Peak's funds. But before Shang Qinghua started his investigation, he went to Baijian Peak. Normally speaking, in terms of seniority, Qingjing Peak was ranked 2nd in Sangchong Mountain, and Baijiang Peak was ranked 7th. After making his deliveries to the first-ranked Chongming Peak, his next stop should have been Qingjing. But on the one hand, Shen Qingqiu was too hard to please, and Shang Qinghua had to rack his brains every time he went to figure out how not to offend him. On the other hand, Baijian Peak loved fighting, so Shang Qinghua felt safer giving them their funds first. Safer how? It was precisely the sense of safety a small shop owner felt when handing his protection fee to the local gang boss. The one who greeted him was Lu Qingge's shidi, Jiju. Jijue? Who was as enthusiastic as always. The two exchanged some small talk, and after the handover was complete, Jiju said, "Shang Shishang, take care. I'm returning to the training grounds." When Shang Qinghua realized that Jiju, I swear that's Jijue, seemed reluctant to see him leave, he said, "Lu Shidi has been staying at Baijian Peak." Jue, thank you. Lu Shidi has been staying at Baijian Peak more often lately. Has any Shidi had a sudden increase in cultivation? Lu Qingge spent all his time in the outside world looking for people to fight. No one on Baijian Peak was a match for him, and he typically only came back once a month at most. Whenever Baijian Peak's disciples and juniors flocked to Qianxiao Peak to seek treatment, that meant he had just returned. But lately, Qianxiao Peak's doorstep had been nearly trampled flat by those great lords from Baijian Peak, and the medicinal peak's funds were getting light. Muqing Fun had started to ask Shang Qinghua for loans every few days, which Shang Qinghua found strange. He couldn't help but wonder, had an extraordinary genius who could stand up to Lu Qingge appeared on Baijian Peak? So he asked. Jijue drooped in gloom. "It's not our peak, it's Shen Qingqiu." Shang Qinghua hadn't expected any earth-shattering news, so he just smiled and nodded. "Oh, Shen Qingqiu. Ah, Shen Qingqiu?" As Shang Qinghua digested the enormous amount of information contained in those two words, he was almost descended out of shock on the spot. Shen Qingqiu, at Baijian Peak. At the Baijian training grounds, no less. Doing what? Getting a one-sided beatdown from Lu Qingge? No, given his skill in drawing aggro, it was probably a group beatdown, but what if it became fatal? He's an important scum villain, you know. If he gets beaten to death, who's going to torment Binge? Shang Shishan, what's that look in your eye? Jijue asked after a silence. Don't look at me like that. We didn't kill anyone. Shen Qingqiu is still alive, and no one's done anything to him. You should be asking what he did to us. So Shang Qinghua jogged with Jijue all the way to the training grounds. On the high basalt... Basalt? I believe so. On the high basalt platform, Lu Qingge and Shen Qingqiu were in actual fact merely crossing swords in an orderly match. Lu Qingge's movements were much slower than usual. Rather than calling it crossing swords, you might as well have called it feeding his opponent training strikes. The space between his brows was still rather smooth, and it emanated none of his typical homicidal tendencies. Just then, Shen Qingqiu's sword struck air. He knitted his brows, and his left hand twitched. Shang Qinghua's heart suddenly stretched taut. He glanced at Jijue out of the corner of his eye and saw that his expression also twitched, like he had an urge to shout out loud. The two glanced at each other in a flash of wordless understanding. Jijue, his heart still palpitating, said in a low voice, "I always feel like Shen Qingqiu is about to deploy a concealed weapon dipped in poison or something." Shang Qinghua expressed his deep agreement. Heroes think alike. It looked like Jishidi understood this character very thoroughly. Exactly what he expected from the fellow who had once picked a fight with Shen Qingqiu at a brothel. They were old enemies who had both soundly lost the faces of two whole peaks. Shen Qingqiu drew back Shuya and stopped to think. For one, he didn't let out a laugh cold like rustling wind, and for two, he didn't look askance at anyone. If one looked at him now, one would see a mild brow and peaceful gaze that still carried a modest air of elegant nobility. Soon after, Shen Qingqiu said, "I don't understand." Lu Qingge flicked a swift and fierce flourish with his sword. "Don't understand what?" A disciple next to Jijue muttered, Heavens, he doesn't understand again." I can't take it anymore," another disciple said quietly. "My stomach feels bad. I'm going back." "Shidi, wait for me." "Me too," Jijue said hurriedly. His Shidi pushed him back. "Stay! Didn't you just get back?" On the platform, Shen Qingqiu said, "Just then, in those few moves, if I blocked your sword with my right hand and let loose a spiritual blast with my left, finding an opportunity to strike your stomach, I would have had a chance of winning." "Not possible," Lu Qingge scoffed. Most possible, Shen Qingqiu persisted. If you could have won, why didn't you try it? Isn't this just sparring? Shen Qingqiu said, aloof. Attacking an artist would be out of line. Liu Qingge didn't bother to reply. Instead, he yelled into the crowd below the platform, "You, get up here!" The person he selected ascended the platform with an expression like the hero Yi Shui, grimly prepared to stare death in the face. Using the method Shen Qingqiu had suggested, they traded a few blows with Liu Qingge before getting blown straight off the platform by Cheng Luan. Liu Qingge sheathed his sword and turned to Shen Qingqiu. See? It wouldn't work. Shen Qingqiu snapped open his fan and waved it in front of his chest. I see, he said, all smiles. Liu Shidi's reflexes are too fast. It wouldn't work after all. Every time he says I don't understand, Liu Shishang grabs someone to demonstrate until he understands, Jijue quietly complained to Shang Qinghua. No wonder the injuries at Baijian Peak had only increased over the past few days. What Chan Sao's Peak's front courtyard was as busy as a marketplace. Shang Qinghua had only one thought in response to this, that Shen Qingqiu had to be doing this on purpose. After he descended the platform, Liu Qingge continued to train, beat up, the Baijian Peak disciples. Shen Qingqiu and Shang Qinghua exchanged greetings, then walked down the mountain together. Just as they were about to exit through the gate, Jijue caught up to them, carrying 2 sacks, which he gave to Shen Qingqiu and Shang Qinghua. Shen Qinghua didn't understand, so he undid the tie to take a look. Inside, he saw 2 balls of bloody, hairy things nestled together, and this is... Liu Shishang caught these short-haired beasts, Jijue said, expression stiff. Apparently they taste very good. Shishang, please take them back to your own peaks to cook them as you please. Short-haired beast? What short-haired beast? Did I really ever create this creature? Is it edible? Are you sure? It looked like Shen Qingqiu was also highly suspicious of the creature's edibility. Thanks for your trouble. Shishang said, This is a gift in return for the tea leaves Qingjing Peak recently sent, Jijue recited woodenly. Tea leaves? Shen Qingqiu had given Liu Qingge tea leaves? What was this? Were they exchanging presents? Internally, Shen Qinghua yelled, Holy shit! While externally, he kept a smile on his face. You mean to say that this is all thanks to Shen Shishang's generosity? What sort of high-quality tea leaves were these? They were harvested from the tea fields of my senior disciple Ming Fan's family, Shen Qingqiu said affably. As for whether they're high quality, won't Shang Shidi know if he comes for tea at Qingjing Peak? Shang Qinghua thickened his face, shameless. Then I have Liu Shishang's generosity to thank as well. So, each carrying a sack, talking about this and that, they walked toward Qingjing Peak. As soon as they passed the mountain gates, serene wind caressed their faces and faint birdsong chittered away. It was an atmosphere entirely distinct from that of the outer world. Together they walked over a soft layer of green bamboo leaves that covered the ground and found themselves feeling several times more refreshed. For some reason, Shen Qingqiu's mood was quite good. He didn't look the least bit like he had just lost to Liu Qingge. He even offered an idle bit of praise. Liu Shidi's swordsmanship is truly something. Shang Qinghua couldn't resist reminding him, Shen Shishang, you... How many times did you lose? Shen Qingqiu thought it over. You're asking about this morning? It was only 7 or 8 times. Then how are you this calm? Shouldn't you be gnashing your teeth in fury, tears staining your face like raindrops on flower petals? A cuckoo crying blood as you whip around to go back into seclusion for 3 months, swearing to duel again? Don't you know you're being OOC? Can't you show a bit more dedication to your role? Shen Qingqiu bashfully tapped the handle of his fan on his nape. There's nothing you can do about losing to the Baijian Peak Lord. It would be more accurate to say that winning would be the unusual outcome. Shang Qinghua had no words. He felt there was no way to communicate with this guy. He's lost his memory. He definitely fell into a chi deviation and lost his memory. If this Shen Qingqiu and Liu Qingge were playing out a scene of a friendly senior and his respectful junior, full of harmonious fraternal love between fellow sect members, oh heavens, maybe in a few days Shen Qingqiu and Lo Binghe would be striking up flirtatious banter. You know? That might be where we stop for today. I am indeed. Oh, we were on page 202. Yeah. So, we'll be doing 2 sessions next week, just in case you weren't here for the very beginning. We're doing 2 sessions next week. We're doing Tuesdays and Thursdays. I can't even remember if that's where the live reading sessions stay, but I think so, but don't quote me on that. But I do know that at least for next week, it will be on Tuesday and Thursday. So we get 2, which is fantastic. I will have my machine thing all sorted out by then, hopefully, knock on wood. I've got a replacement thing coming. It should actually be here, really. So we should be all good for then, for a nice, good, like, full 2-hour sessions next week. Outside of that, I believe that's it. Happy Pride once again. You guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Have a wonderful weekend. It's Pride. Like, do something a little prideful. You know what I mean? Just have a little bit of fun somewhere in your weekend. And I will see you guys next Tuesday and Thursday. I am so sorry I did not get the notification that we were having a stream up until, like, this morning. That was my bad. I will once again endeavor to make them be a couple of days ahead of time so that you guys are properly warned. That was my mistake. But yeah, that's what next week looks like. I hope you guys had fun. I will see you guys then. And please, please, please take care of yourselves, okay? Especially during Pride. I will see you guys next week. Bye.